Hello, everyone. Good evening. Both supporters and critics of U.S. President Donald Trump agree that the first year of his second term has been nothing short of tumultuous. But significant as this disruption is, it isn't entirely unexpected. Even as the last ballots were being counted, enough was known about Trump's intentions to make some relatively solid predictions about the shape of his second term, as I did a year ago. For example, Trump's most senior advisors, as he promised, are individuals chosen based on personal loyalty and the ability to mobilize his base, with a few notable exceptions, such as Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who might have fit in a former Trump cabinet. The personnel now driving the Trump second-term policy machine are the agents of disruption that were expected after the election. He's also leaning even more heavily into unilateralism, which was predictable given that he entered office this time with fewer geopolitical constraints than before. For example, he inherited two coalition wars involving UK troops, Afghanistan, and the anti-ISIS campaign. And his hands were tied on Iran by the Allied diplomatic approach embodied in the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Similarly, the constraints of the global trading system, which the first Trump administration sought to reduce, have further diminished in recent years because of post-COVID-19 efforts to build greater resilience. Economically, Trump had a much freer hand to play in 2025, and thus he was positioned to pursue his maximalist approach to tariffs. A far bumpier civil-military relationship was also foreseeable this time around. Trump spent much of his first term surrounded by retired military officers. But in the final 6 months of that term, as their advice increasingly diverged from Trump's preferences and his base criticized him for deferring to their concerns, Trump concluded that the military was part of a deep state committed to thwarting him. Trump and those speaking on his behalf made it clear that they intended to clean house upon their return. Although his decision to remove at least 15 senior officers, many of them women or people of color, without mentioning specific instances of dereliction of duty, is alarming, it is not entirely surprising. However, despite the predictability of this opening gambit, some developments have progressed much farther and faster than most people anticipated. Indeed, Trump has genuinely shocked observers on three fronts: his deployment of the military within U.S. borders, his pivot to the Western Hemisphere as the primary foreign policy theater, effectively pushing China to the back burner, and his ability to strong-arm Congress into ceding its power and responsibility. The significance, and perhaps permanence, of these first-year surprises suggests they may have an outsized influence on Trump's foreign policy and national security legacy. They also create the conditions for a major swing of the pendulum, as future presidents attempt to repair the overreach or, alternatively, pursue their own agendas to new limits set by Trump's precedent. Given that Trump campaigned extensively on the issue of immigration, it was no secret that, upon re-election, he would take an inward turn with a hardline stance against undocumented immigrants. In his campaign speeches, he floated the idea of involving the National Guard in deportation efforts, an evolution from his use of military units to patrol the southern border with Mexico during his first term. He also doubled down on his argument that local law enforcement was consistently overwhelmed, a conclusion he reached during the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020. But little from his first term in office or from his campaign foreshadowed the types of domestic military deployments he has ordered in his second. Trump has sent thousands of troops from the National Guard to major U.S. cities, such as Chicago, Los Angeles, Memphis, Portland, and Washington, D.C. In most cases, over the objections of local authorities. In Los Angeles, Trump also authorized the use of active-duty Marines, saying that local protests, which had been sparked by aggressive raids by U.S. immigration and customs enforcement, were spiraling out of control. Trump and his advisors even spoke on multiple occasions about invoking the Insurrection Act, legislation that would empower the president to direct a large military response to operate as an arm of law enforcement and address what he sees as a domestic emergency. Trump is not the first U.S. president to federalize the National Guard or deploy active-duty forces to address problems within Utah's borders. But most domestic deployments have been in response to natural disasters, such as Hurricane Katrina in 2005, or to assist at major events, such as the Super Bowl or an inauguration. Likewise, the use of the military to patrol the border is not a shocking task. Even critics of Trump's use of the military to patrol the border during his first term did not focus on the legality of the deployment. Rather, they questioned whether it was an efficient or appropriate use of military resources and training. Trump has genuinely shocked observers on three fronts. In contrast, Trump's use of military force domestically over the past year has crossed a clearer line by putting the apolitical military in the middle of partisan conflicts. Military personnel have sometimes been sent in response to peaceful demonstrations about Trump's policies, other times to deal with chronically high crime rates. In certain instances, they have been sent for no apparent reason other than to troll or intimidate largely democratic cities. To be sure, past presidents have deployed the military domestically for controversial missions that they deemed to be in defense of the Constitution, most notably during the Civil Rights era, when local law enforcement could not be trusted to guarantee the rights of all citizens. Those deployments were politically fraught at the time, particularly for those in the South who wanted to maintain the Jim Crow system of racial segregation. But history has ultimately vindicated the decision, as Trump may believe it will do for him. However, the wide gulf between the enormity of the military response and the triviality of the local threats at present increases the possibility that Trump's deployments will not be judged as a win for defending the Constitution, but rather as an attempt to further a partisan policy agenda. Unsurprisingly, the military has obeyed every order from Trump so far. The military plays only an advisory role in the U.S. system, contributing to presidential deliberations but not itself judging whether his decisions are wise. Rather, the surprising part of the deployments is Trump's intention. Why Trump thinks they are necessary or smart remains uncertain. In the absence of clear and persuasive explanations from the Trump administration on the purposes of the deployments, many critics are making worst-case speculations. For example, they are speculating that this is a rehearsal for aggressive deployments timed to shape, if not interfere with, the elections of 2026 and 2028. If even partially accurate, such a dramatic escalation would cast doubt on the credibility of election results and place the military at the center of the blame for the outcome. This would make it difficult for the military to sustain the nonpartisan institution that every administration depends on. It would also turn the military into an untrustworthy guardian of the Constitution. It might have been clear that the America First president intended to focus greater attention on the Western Hemisphere. But it has still been surprising the degree to which the second Trump administration has elevated the Western Hemisphere above the Indo-Pacific in its foreign policy approach. Based on the pattern of the first Trump administration, which effectively mobilized the entire federal government to take a more aggressive stance against China, the Indo-Pacific seemed likely to be a priority in Trump's second term. Messaging from Trump's second campaign similarly promised an end to distractions in Gaza and Ukraine too, as Vice President J.D. Vance stated, "Focus on the real problem of China." Addressing competition with China was also an area where there was broad bipartisan support. But although the administration has certainly not ignored the Indo-Pacific, it has surprised many, and perhaps Beijing most of all, that China has been unremarkable in Trump's second-term views. Trump appears to be approaching China through the narrow lens of trade deals, rather than a comprehensive strategy of competition. All elements of national power. China is now facing higher tariffs than most other countries. But Trump has earnestly signaled his willingness to bring China's tariffs in line with those of other countries in exchange for Beijing's suspension of restrictions on U.S. access to rare earth minerals. After Trump met with China's leader in South Korea in October, he affirmed the potential for reducing, or even suspending, certain U.S. tariffs on China. Adding to this surprise is Trump's unexpected treatment of the Western Hemisphere, where expansive foreign policy goals and considerations for using force have suddenly cropped up. For example, Trump's musings about expanding U.S. territory to include both Canada and Greenland and retaking control of the Panama Canal, which were initially dismissed as jokes, appear to be genuine foreign policy goals. Trump has returned to the threats repeatedly, including in direct statements on social media. Unsurprisingly, the military has obeyed every order from Trump so far. The president has also turned the war on drugs from a metaphor into a literal expression. He has repeatedly threatened to use military force to attack drug cartels in Kosovo, without the cooperation of the Mexican government, which would amount to an act of war against the United States' southern neighbor, the first major military operation there since U.S. President Woodrow Wilson authorized the punitive expedition to capture Mexican revolutionary Pancho Villa on the margins of World War I. At the same time, Trump is significantly ramping up aggressive military actions and coercive diplomacy against the Nicolás Maduro regime in Venezuela, with repeated deadly strikes against ships that he says are carrying narcotics in Caribbean and Pacific waters. Along the way, the Trump administration has given every indication that it is pursuing regime change including Trump's recent confirmation that he has authorized covert CIA action there. Trump famously criticized regime change as a strategy in 2016, which helped make him a viable presidential candidate in the first place. Trump's transformation from regime change critic to champion has been one of the most head-spinning developments to date. Trump's pursuit of the violent overthrow of a South American nation is especially ironic given that it could directly increase the flow of migrants across the U.S. southern border, an issue that Trump has campaigned aggressively to address. In every aspect, Trump's pivot from China to the Western Hemisphere has been a remarkably unexpected aspect of his second term. If it is sustained, it will have global repercussions, possibly shifting the balance of power decisively in China's favor and further shrinking U.S. global influence. To some extent, it is normal for second-term presidents to start with lofty, even outsized ambitions. They enter office with a belief that they have a clear mandate from voters, and they do not require the same learning curve as first-term presidents. They are also eager to get to work because, inevitably, they will face the lame duck phase of their presidency. But while this political pattern might be predictable, Trump's impressive control over his base and his party is novel. Even as his agenda has swung wildly between oppositional policies and backpedaling on campaign promises, arming Ukraine versus not arming Ukraine, being tough on China versus cutting a deal with China, ending the forever wars versus attacking enemies in multiple theaters, Trump boasts remarkably high levels of popularity, with more than 90% approval among Republicans. For about 43% of respondents who identify as Republican or lean Republican, what matters most is loyalty to Trump's agenda. However, more surprising than Trump's continued control over his base is the truly shocking dominance he has managed to assert over the legislative branch. Every modern president dreams of bypassing Congress and usurping congressional prerogatives, such as control of the purse strings, but no president since Franklin Roosevelt has been able to do so as effectively as Trump. This is particularly impressive considering the slim majority that the Republicans hold in the current Congress. It would only take a handful of Republicans defecting to the Democrat side to block some of Trump's more radical policies, but they have proven remarkably unwilling to do so. A few who have flirted with challenging the president have quickly seen their re-election fortunes falter. Even more remarkably, members who have declared retirement and should therefore be immune to re-election anxieties, nonetheless remain loath to vote with the Democrats to check the Trump administration in any meaningful way. Following a landslide Democratic victory in the November 2025 elections, Republicans concerned about Trump's policies might be emboldened to assert congressional oversight power. But so far, the defining feature of Trump's second term has been the extent to which Congress defers to the executive, even as Trump usurps the independent power of his co-equals. Trump's hollowing out of American global power could usher in a new geopolitical order. For example, Trump has ignored clear congressional mandates in the area of foreign aid and undermined quasi-independent foreign policy institutions created by Congress. He has also sidelined the Government Accountability Office and Inspectors General. He has curtailed congressional briefings by executive branch officials in the area of national security and foreign policy. And he has bypassed congressional oversight over arms sales to the Middle East and security assistance to Ukraine, even when those benefits had already been allocated by Congress. But despite a litany of public violations of congressional power, lawmakers have done little to reclaim their traditional role in policymaking. If this trend continues, the U.S. constitutional system could be decisively altered. The framers of the Constitution created a powerful president because they trusted powerful legislative and judicial branches to serve as counterweights. If those branches are willing to cede responsibility for enforcing guardrails on the executive, then the only check on presidential impulses will be whatever restraint the administration's internal deliberation provides. A year after Trump's re-election, the biggest unknown is how long any of this can last. Trump's actions, those predicted and those unforeseen, are creating tremendous opportunities for change. Both domestic and international actors are sure to react. Domestically, for example, Trump has upended the delicate balance that is vital to both civil-military relations and constitutional checks and balances. In doing so, he has posed alarming questions about the future of the constitutional system. Yet, domestic trends are not irreversible. If Congress rediscovers a zeal to protect legislative prerogatives and to exercise rigorous oversight of the executive branch, the rest of Trump's second term could look markedly different from the first year. And if Democrats win one or both houses of Congress in the 2026 midterm elections, the checks on the president could well revert to historical norms, perhaps even returning to the congressional assertiveness of the era immediately following Watergate. If Republicans maintain control or even expand their majority in Congress, the outlook is more difficult to predict. At that point, Trump will increasingly resemble a lame duck, and ambitious Republicans may see some advantage in distancing themselves from the more controversial Trump second-term policies. On the other hand, such a historically challenging election result could just as easily empower the administration to do whatever it takes to cement Trump's legacy as the most transformational president of the modern era. Internationally, the United States has long relied on the global power and influence that it built up in the post-Cold War era to maintain peace between great powers. But Trump is depleting these reserves. And at some point, the institutions upon which the United States relies to constitute its power and manage global order will fracture. What happens next is anyone's guess. China, for example, as the United States' principal rival for global power, has made clear that it has no interest in buttressing the U.S. Built order. Beijing seeks an alternative system that would benefit China more locally. And at this point, it may be happy to see Trump pivot to the Western Hemisphere so that it can pursue its agenda in Asia, the region with the greatest economic significance for the future. Meanwhile, no foreseeable consolidation of U.S. partners and allies seems likely to replace U.S. leadership on the global stage. Although our European and Asian partners are eager to work with the United States to address geopolitical challenges, they are unlikely to implement long-term beneficial solutions without the United States shouldering its share of the burden. Absent a course correction, Trump's hollowing out of American global power could usher in a new geopolitical order, one in which powers that are hostile, or at best indifferent, to U.S.